Hey everybody, this is Scott Arnell, and welcome to this episode of the SRI 360 podcast, where it is my job to interview world-class sustainable and responsible investors, executives, or entrepreneurs who are driving positive change in the world while achieving market returns. And I do this to bring you the lessons that they've learned along the way from their investment activities and their experiences, and to find out exactly what they are actually doing and how they're doing it so that you can have better insights into the different SRI investing strategies that are actually being done today, what they're actually doing right now, and how they're doing it across many different asset classes. And hopefully, this will help you invest in a more purposeful way and to invest for positive impact for a better world through your investment activities. You're actually from Canada, if I'm right.
I am, yeah, indeed. Yeah, from Toronto, born in Toronto. And I went to school in upstate New York. Went there for the improved weather.
Yeah. I noticed you didn't buy your holiday home there, though.
No, those are some pretty places, but it's nice for like 6 weeks a year.
So you live in Toronto until you left for university?
Exactly, yeah. And then I stayed in the States. I went to investment banking, so I went through the analyst training program at Bankers Trust. I ended up staying there, got promoted to associate, stayed on for a total of 5 years at BT. And then I was recruited away to go to Bear, and I went to Bear for, again, another 5 years, 3 in the US and then two in London. I moved to London in 98.
Okay, so the move to Europe was, I should say London these days, was with Bear.
12 years, and I was running out of sort of visa options, honestly. And they said, "Oh, go to London and we'll figure something out for you to come back in a year or two." And I ended up just staying.
If I'm correct, when you went to Cornell, your studies were in aerospace, aeronautical, and astronautical engineering. So you were going to be an astronaut.
Aerospace engineering, yeah. I think the ideal job was to go work for NASA or JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs, and build rovers and spacecraft and these sorts of things. Yeah.
So how did you get into finance?
Yeah, not really. Literally, I mean, you don't do these things, aerospace engineering, lightly. Kind of three semesters of thermodynamics and fluid dynamics and heat transfer and these sorts of things. You don't do that just because you're curious. You have to be curious, but you don't do it with the intention not to practice. Finance came lately, and I think it was really because in some way I found that engineering was just too slow moving, Scott, and it was just that it was going to be so much time until I could actually do anything meaningful within engineering. You start on very small subsystems, and then by the time you're our age now, you graduate to something like a whole ship or a whole rover or whatever it may be, and it does take that, feels like that really that long to actually get to the point where you're actually in charge of anything.
So how did you make the jump then into financial services?
I had some friends who had done it, who were a year or two ahead of me at university, and obviously I knew about Wall Street, and I had a genuine interest in finance. And so they said, "Oh, you should be, there's these things called analyst training programs, and they're really quite technical, and you're quite technical, so maybe that will work. Why don't you apply? And then rather than you should hedge your bets, because maybe this engineering stuff isn't going to work out." So I did both and ended up getting into the analyst training program.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and so then aircraft finance. So that was the kind of link, if you will, in some ways, that I was financing the stuff that I had previously figured out how to build.
So I asked the question because it's always interesting how there's some people who actually knew what they wanted to do since they were 8 years old, and I'm not one of them. And
I did, but then I changed my mind.
So then around 2005, you landed in Germany, Jargonnant.
Yeah, exactly right.
Tell me what that was, what you were doing there, and what that was like.
I'd left banking after 11 years, and I'd gone literally from analyst to senior person on the field. And 11 years in banking, as you know, that's hard yards, from the typical 100-hour weeks to everything else. And so I'd been doing a lot of real estate and asset financing, and then that turned into doing from ships and aircraft and satellites to doing real estate, anything with a cash flow and a tangible asset underpinning it. And I had done IPOs for Planet Hollywood and Sun International, and then bond financings, and had met, as you know, in real estate in particular, there's a lot of colorful characters and people who have just through sheer grit and determination and an attention to detail, I think in many ways, just made fortunes. And so I thought, gosh, that seems like a pretty neat thing to do. I love real estate. I love building things with my hands. Why don't I just start investing in real estate as opposed to just advising people who are investing in real estate? And so that's what I did. I left banking, and after doing kind of my own thing for a couple of years, found these guys in Germany, two partners who had set up a small business who were investing, and I joined them as a third partner. But they found these ultra high net worth investors. They managed to get them to commit to investing with them off the back of kind of a 2-page teaser sort of thing. We had some great relationships with bankers at Pictet and Eric Seat Bank and the Swiss luminaries. We managed to hopscotch around and find literally the wealthiest man in France, co-founder of eBay, a top 10 Italian family, guys who were running big, huge U.S. hedge funds, and they all gave us capital to invest in Germany. So it was really pretty remarkable.
And this was in commercial real estate?
A lot of it was residential. So we had 5,500 apartment units in Berlin. And we had, 6 or 8 commercial buildings as well on top of that. But we had, I think, in total, roughly around 80 buildings.
One point around 2008, then you jumped to Capricorn, correct?
I did, yeah.
Which is,
do you know them? Do you know the guys there much?
I don't know them, but of course they're known because it's a family office of Jeff Skull. And then you were doing this in London, I guess, opposed to in California.
Yeah, so we ended up selling our German real estate portfolio, probably all but half a dozen of the 80 buildings we sold in 07 and 08. Great timing, and returned a huge amount of capital to investors, did very well. At the time, I was commuting back and forth from Munich to London. And the guys at Capricorn said, look, first of all, thank you. Second of all, can we hire you? Because we're sitting here in this middle of a storm. We seem to own all of this, Mesref, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, Whitehall funds that we were sold by our friendly neighborhood private bankers. And it's not looking too clever right now. Why don't you move back to London? We'll set up a small outpost in London, hang out there, and then you can take over the real estate business and join us as one of the 4 partners of the firm, sit on the investment committee, and we'd love to have an outpost in London. Anyways, Palo Alto to Europe is a pretty long way, and it seems like we need to be a bit more connected with what's happening in Europe. So that's what I did.
You literally started that office.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. Obviously, it's a fascinating time to be managing capital. I'm sure you remember back to those days and advising clients on what to do and seeing the good, bad, and ugly of what was in people's portfolio. Yeah, no, it was a fascinating time. So I got to see everything, obviously, in the whole portfolio, and sitting on the investment committee, make some pretty critical decisions about not only what we were investing in, but how we were investing.
To get on to why I wanted to talk to you today was then it seems like around 2012, I believe you founded FORE Partnership, correct?
I did. Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we learned through the GFC was that, and I think even earlier, given our connection into some of the great ideas I mentioned, was that actually there weren't many products out there that we were being shown that actually reflected our values and our purpose, and certainly in Jeff's. When I say our, I mean largely Jeff's, which he infused in the organizations which he runs. So we were doing a lot more things on our own directly, and we were plugged into that ecosystem, that Silicon Valley ecosystem. So a lot of things that we were seeing were things like, early stage Tesla. We were C-round investors in Tesla. We were early stage investors in solar PV manufacturers, which we invested in heavily, water rights, you name it. Anything that, as I say, alignment with this vision around a low carbon, socially impactful, socially inclusive world, and thematically aligned with things that the Skoll Foundation was doing and finding people who were doing it in the nonprofit or social entrepreneur sector. So they might be researching water, for example, and looking at lots of different ways that people were addressing water shortages and water poverty around the world. And we would tap into that intellectual capital and then find for-profit businesses that were also aligned with it. And so we found that a much better way of investing. And so we built a bit of a track record doing direct investing. So we were reclaiming and redeeming money back from fund managers and investing that capital ourselves in a direct way. So we built some internal funds or captive funds around it. We invited third-party investors to invest in those funds, but they were thematic. It was around clean and green private equity, around healthcare. So we had these verticals that we opened up to others in this captive or semi-captive way. And so I was curious then about real estate, and having done direct investing in real estate, I wanted to do that within the portfolio. And being so far away from Palo Alto and the mothership, I thought rather than doing it as integrally into the family office and as a sleeve within the portfolio, why don't I set it up really as more of a sort of separate business? So that's what I did. I effectively spun out. Capricorn retained an interest in the business. I raised some third-party capital, and then started to invest.
And are they still involved with you?
I'm still investing capital. We look after about, we probably have 15 investors in addition to Capricorn now, and they still own a stake in the business.
So anyone who might be listening to this, FORE Partnership is not the number 4, it's FORE. And I've found two different definitions of this acronym. One is family office real estate, and then I've found another one that says the future of real estate. So which one is it?
Yeah, I think when we started off, we thought, what do we want to do? We want to invest in a way that's aligned with family values. In families, private capital doesn't feel like Whitehall and Goldman Sachs product pushers are necessarily aligned. So why don't we do this in a way that's considering family offices? So we thought of it, family office real estate. But I think over the years, it's really morphed in as we've taken on a bit of institutional capital. We've also realized that actually what we're doing is talking about the future of real estate. What does the future of the built environment look like? What does the future of cities look like?
So now it's the future of real estate.
Yeah, it's a bit broader than just for family offices.
Yeah, that's good. What was the genesis of your pivot into sustainability and impact investing?
Yeah, I'd say it really is 20 years ago, or close to 20 years ago, from the early days when I started to invest for Jeff, even at the Jargonnant days. I think the first time I went to the School World Forum at Oxford was probably 2004, 2005, so it was pretty early days. And you can't help but find inspiration in these sort of stories and people who are top of their field and doing amazing things with very little resources, and blessed and gifted with lots of opportunity and a great job and great career. But then you come across these people who are tackling meaningful problems with a lot less resources than I've been given, and that helps, I think, to find meaning. So I think that I would even go back further than when I was a partner at Capricorn, and those are the first times that I started to get to know the Capricorn guys and investing on their behalf and being part of their whole ecosystem.
Yeah, cool.
And then, of course, inside the platform, then you really realize that actually, when I joined in 2008, you realize that actually there's a ton of money to be made here, and people are just missing the opportunity. I mean, I would even push that one a bit further, if I may, and I would say that I think when we say it's not a negative, that implies it's neutral. I guess I would suggest that it's actually going to be a prerequisite for success in the future, is to have a purposeful approach to investing. I think if you miss out on big systemic changes, and I think we would agree that going back 100 years of investing history, if you miss out on big systemic changes, it doesn't matter whether you've picked the right stocks within the dyeing sector. If you picked the best tobacco company in the 70s, it doesn't matter. You would always have been trumped by IBM, or any tech company. You know what I mean? So I think the secular shift towards thoughtful, purposeful, responsible investment trends grounded in, of course, climate, I think is so powerful that if you're not on the boat, you're drowning.
Let's jump into FORE Partnership, and maybe you could start out with and frame things by just giving me a high-level introduction and overview of FORE Partnership, and maybe elaborate a little bit what your mission is.
Yeah, I think in terms of our mission, we believe in a low-carbon future in which property is a force for social good. So I think in that is this duality of both the E and the S of ESG, and I think we can unpack that a little bit as we go through this. We've been doing this for now 9 years, just to put some rough numbers on it. We've raised a couple $100 million of capital. Probably the largest number I could conjure up is roughly around 700 million euros of property value, and the property value that we aim to be delivering about 1.1 million square feet of real estate, of 13 assets that we've purchased. So we're sort of at the big end of the small end of the mid-sized guys, carved out a little bit of a niche for ourselves in that domain. Our assets tend to be focused in two areas: offices, which are about 2/3 of our portfolio, and a bucket I would call living. And within living, it's three separate sleeves briefly: co-living, which is this micro apartment, small flats, center city, urban, primarily that bring affordability to key workers and young professionals who want to live in the center city, but otherwise can't afford to. Senior living, and then actually affordable housing, so really bottom of the pyramid housing for people who are really on the cusp of homelessness and marginalized populations within urban cities. So those are the two areas with three subsets within the living sector that we're investing in. What else? In terms of the structure, I think to date, we've been, and I think it's one of your questions further on as well, we've been using this, call it club structure, where same as what we had in Germany, actually, where if you think about values-oriented, values-aligned investing, I think you would not necessarily come up with the typical private equity fund model where it pits GPs against LPs. Plenty of examples of LPs suing GPs, GPs suing LPs, classic cases of Carlyle and other perpetrators who have accelerated transaction fee expenses and were sued by the SEC and all. It's a case study of basically bad behavior. And you're pitting financial giants and titans against some poorly understaffed and under-resourced SEC and LPs who are equally trying to follow the marbles in the shell game of private finance. So that's why we came up with this model of a club model where we gave investors back some discretion and allowed them to, on a deal-by-deal basis, allocate capital as they saw fit. At the same time, forcing them effectively to invest in our transactions. There's no free lunch. If I said to you, do you want to see all of our deal flow and pick and choose which ones you invest in? Like 99% of people would say, sure, why not? Free lunch. So we get people to commit to a program of investing, and then they have to invest in every deal. But as a group, they can veto it, and then there's this allocation point around they can invest how much they want to in each deal. That's what we've been doing.
Is it one fund or is it a partnership? Or what is it?
Again, historically, these are deal by deals. So it's you invest in one deal. We've got 10 investors, say, for example. We go around and see how much everyone wants to invest in each deal, and then you invest in that deal, single purpose SPV, which you own. Next deal comes along. We happen to have not 10, but we've got 12 investors now in our stable. Those 12 investors tell us how much they want to invest each into a transaction. We put them into a separate SPV. It's like an organized club. I mean, I don't know your view, but I think club deals are very difficult and probably have, broadly speaking, failed to move the needle in terms of the amount of capital deployed. Too difficult, too complex. Each one's reinventing the wheel every time you do it. And you don't have the committed capital to go out to the market and secure transactions, particularly in real estate, which is a relatively fast-moving asset class. So that's what our model, I think, solved for. And it's been great. What we've realized, though, is that it's not really scalable. And our model is complicated. It's not very institutional. It's difficult to raise institutional capital who are used to seeing things in a certain way, even if it's to their detriment. We're launching a fund. We were going to launch it last year, and obviously with COVID, we put pause on that. But we're launching a $250 million ESG-driven real estate fund that will look like a more traditional GPLP structure and appeal more to institutional capital as well as private capital. And we're doing that. We're coming out with that.
One last housekeeping thing I wanted to pick on. You're a certified B corporation. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, B Corp is a global movement across all industries, not just real estate, for companies of all shapes and sizes to end this notion of shareholder primacy and to commit in their charter, articles of association, bylaws, whatever the corporate form that they take, to taking into consideration people, planet, as well as profit. And so those are the three things. And you submit to examination by the B Corp organizers who evaluate your business to determine whether you're worthy of B Corp status and whether you're already doing those things. And then if you pass their rigorous screening, you get B Corp accreditation. And then they come back every 3 years and recertify you. What's interesting about it is it looks across all areas of your business, how you treat your employees, how you treat your shareholders, how you treat your customers, in our case, how you treat your tenants, but equally across areas in the ESG spectrum. So environmental sustainability, carbon footprint, social impact. It really is, I think it's, for me, it's the one certification or evaluation tool that really is properly 360 degrees and looks at all aspects of what it means to be a responsible business. So we became a certified B Corp last year.
And why was that an important move for you as an investment manager? Are your competitors doing that?
Yeah, I'm not really paying too much attention to what our competitors are doing, to be honest. I think we're one of the first investment managers to become a certified B Corp, certainly in real estate land. And I think that's interesting. But I think it codifies things, and you put things in your bylaws, your charter, and these become quite official. It's not like just a badge that sits on a wall or an award that sits on a shelf. These are things that you think about every day when you're managing the business. So I think it's a great signal internally to the staff what our values are, what matters, what's relevant, how decisions should be taken in their everyday lives. So I think it's an important one.
Yeah. And then one last thing I don't think we hit was for your investments, are you benchmarking or do you have a target return? Or are you benchmarking against any particular benchmark?
Yeah, we try to hit a 12 to 15% net IRR, but I think IRRs can be a bit deceiving in real estate. So I'd say probably moving more towards a kind of a 3-part return profile. So 12 to 15 net IRR, a 1.6 equity multiple, and double-digit cash on cash. And I think if we were to hit 2 of those, we would be happy. So I think it's probably speaks as much to holding period as much as anything. The fact that maybe we would take something that has an 8 or 9 or 10 IRR, but if it gets to a 1.6 multiple and at the end of the stabilization period we're delivering double-digit cash on cash, why not? I don't think we should hold a gun to our own head with IRR.
Let's maybe try to dig into your business now and start with some basics. Yeah, on the micro level, perhaps on the human level. Maybe you could describe what the impact of the built environment, of the urban environment, both in terms of human well-being and social impact and the environmental. I guess it can be positive, but it can also be negative. So yeah, I guess this kind of gets at your theory of change. What did you see, and what are you trying to address?
Yeah, I think this is part of the urgency in our mission that we feel. Certainly the climate crisis I think we can all agree is real and it's getting worse. But equally, I think within the real estate is probably one of the greatest untapped opportunities that exists. Incredible amounts of work to be done. I don't know what the statistics are, but it's probably something like 2 or 3 or 4% of the buildings that are out there are actually, quote, green. We've all committed as countries to be net carbon zero by 2050, 2045. In many cases, some cities have committed to earlier targets like Manchester and others in the UK. So every building that's not currently achieving carbon neutrality is going to need to be refurbished, renovated, repositioned, or rebuilt in that period of time. What's shocking when you think of it, buildings roughly have a 30-year refurbishment life cycle. If you've got a building that's got air conditioning and mechanical electrical kit, that stuff usually lasts for about 30 years. Building fabric lasts for longer, but the kit lasts for roughly about 30 years. So we're now within that refurbishment cycle, 2020 to 2050. So every building is effectively being refurbished now needs to be net zero carbon. And another interesting statistic is something like 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 have already been built. So we have a huge task ahead of us in terms of the industry. And just some statistics for you. I think everyone knows this one that real estate uses about 40% of the global CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. I think that's one that's widely touted. But of that, I wrote down some statistics that we use sometimes. I think I may have sent this to you, so you may have it. But of that, 17% is residential, 11% is non-residential, and then 11% comes from the construction industry. And it's roughly about the same for energy consumption. Buildings use about 36% of the global energy consumption. It's huge. It's the largest single sector. So if we want to tackle greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions, we have to tackle, given those two parallel thoughts, real estate has not yet been touched for all intents and purposes in terms of getting to zero. And it's responsible it's the largest single sector in terms of its responsibility. It's huge. There's some statistics I've read that something like 70% of global energy consumptions and CO2 emissions come from cities. It doesn't come from cows and fields and this fun stuff that we like to talk about. It comes from cities. So it's our built environment. And it's getting worse. I think we've made great strides. I think we're also building more and more square feet. Between 2010 and 2019, final energy demand's been up 7%. And although energy intensity on a per building basis may be down, we actually are moving in the wrong direction. Cities and buildings are consuming more energy today than they were a decade ago.
You said that 80% of all buildings by 2050 that will exist in 2050 are already built. Is that right?
Yeah. Wow. So one of our focuses is on refurbishment. And so, again, I think a theme and I think a pervasive idea that we have is it's great if you're LNG or Aviva or Canary Wharf and you control big tracts of land like King's Cross, or you're doing these huge regeneration projects like Hudson Yards in New York. That's great. And you've got a different set of tools in your toolkit that allow you, I think, greater flexibility in terms of addressing the environmental sustainability and social impact agenda. How about every building on every street? How about your house where you're sitting? How about my house? How about my office building, which is a building of 15,000 square feet in total What about those? We knock them down and rebuild them. They're often buildings, commercial office buildings. You think of London or Geneva, usually landlocked, no roof space, no outside space, no public realm, no public space within the building. So if you want to program social impact events or something, where do you do that? Do you do that in the lift lobby of the fourth floor? I mean, it's difficult. For me, the much more interesting question is not how do we do regeneration where we've got 5-acre center city tract of land, which is great, but how do we tackle the every building on every street problem?
What about on the micro level, at the human level? Do you have a focus or mission on that in terms of the living environment of the buildings, the human aspect, I suppose, or the social impact?
Yeah, and social, I think we would say that the E and the S, as I alluded to earlier, are deeply interconnected. And so we also recognize that buildings are a potential delivery vector for social change. If you think of it, we spend 80-90% of our time inside buildings. Buildings have huge impact on communities, negative, but could also have a positive impact. So if you're trying to tackle food poverty or jobs and skills training, where will you do that, no matter what the kind of program or the activity, where that activity needs to happen somewhere. It needs to happen within the built environment. And so when you think of our urban systems in a systemic, interconnected way, you start to realize that buildings are actually at the center of this, and the system comprises government and social organizations and retailers and transportation and infrastructure. But within that, at the center, core of that is buildings. So we look at our buildings as a way to deliver social outcomes as much as environmental outcomes. Let's take a building in Scotland that we're doing called Cadworks, Cadworks. So we think that in that particular case, we wanted to make a big push around cycling, micromobility. So we took out the parking garage entirely, and instead we put state-of-the-art cycling and facilities with lots of different options for people in the building to either hire a bike or ride a scooter or ride their own bike, or shower and changing, stretching facilities, people who are disabled have equal access. And we made it fun. Put a cycle-in ramp so you get to the basement by cycling in this really cool glass ramp that runs through the reception area of the building. So it's really cool. And so it encourages people to cycle because it takes a lot of the barriers away.
Yeah.
Then on the social side of things, we're saying, like, let's just not put in a bike rack and think that we're somehow changing the world. Let's make that bike rack work a lot harder. How are we changing social outcomes? So we found some social enterprises, and this happens to be in Glasgow, who are using cycling as a way to solve some key social issues. So they've one called Soul Riders, who takes disused bicycles that you may have in your garage, your garden shed, takes them into their workshop, fixes them. The people who fix them are people who are at the fringes of society who may not have jobs and be jobless or lacking skills. They teach them how to be bike mechanics, give them a sense of purpose and worth. They fix the bikes, and then they give the bikes back out into society for people who, say, may not be able to get to work, to a job of any type because they can't afford the transportation, or who may have health issues and want to cycle, or they can't afford a bike for the kids. They give them away. So they use the cycling as a way to address these social outcomes within Glasgow. So we partnered with them. We're going to give them a small workshop space in our building. We partnered with them even when the building's being refurbished. We did a big bike donation drive around the property industry, brought in 60 or 70 bicycles in terms of donations for them, which was a huge number. And then we've partnered them with other social enterprises that we're working with. So there's another one called Social Bites, which is a small food shop that, again, has a social purpose, and they feed homeless and they try to fix poverty and food insecurity. So we actually gave them a bicycle, which is maintained and repaired and operated by Soul Riders, which is doing now deliveries. And so this is connective tissue between what we're doing on the for-profit commercial side, fantastic cycling infrastructure that will attract tenants, and then the social side. But it's all around the theme of cycling. Right. And just to put a bow around it, why we do this, we do it because we think it's brand reinforcing for the building. It's authentic. We're going to also, when the building's not quite yet finished, but when we have tenants in it, we'll encourage them we'll maybe put in place programs where they can bring their bicycle in to be repaired by the Soul Riders folks in the building, get some exposure to the great work that the charity's doing. Maybe they'll go on a cycle ride with young impoverished people. We'll get them all together. And it creates this interconnectedness between the tenants of the building and purpose, which ultimately is why people make decisions, I think, is around around purpose and values, which will hopefully create stickiness. Tenants stay longer, the building rents faster, and ultimately drives rental values higher.
And then I think you developed something called the building forward strategy. So maybe we could get down to how are you now executing to try to solve these big issues that you've painted for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think building forward is really, it's a kind of an amalgamation of all of these themes. And I think we can all agree that climate change is an existential risk to us as investors, but also us as a society. And I think when I read the IPCC report that recently came out and was jumping on the bandwagon saying how terrible it is and how awful it is. And in some ways, I feel like, what voice do I have to add to that? I think we can all agree that it's bad. So let's park that. Let's park that one, and let's look to the future. And what does the future of cities look like? What does the future of our urban landscape look like? And what's our vision for the future? And our vision for the future is quite clearly this deeply interconnected system where buildings are agents of change to some of society's greatest problems, and be that climate or be that social issues around jobs and skills. As we think about the new economy, some of the things I've been blessed with seeing firsthand and having a front row seat towards, that's going to leave this transition to this new economy around, some people call it the fourth industrial revolution. It's going to leave people behind. We need to have a just transition. We need to ensure that the jobs and skills of tomorrow are being delivered, and that we're inclusive in this transformative epoch that we're entering. And I think that's what building forward is. How do we make our buildings part of the solution and deliver change?
So getting down to execution now, how are you actually deploying this now? You said you're primarily focusing on renovations. How is your strategy to select an investment? What's your due diligence process, and what kind of screens do you have, both financial, non-financial?
First of all, we can't separate the real estate fundamentals from this kind of value-based approach that I've mentioned. Yeah. So we're not going to set aside good real estate investment principles. So we do all of the due diligence that you would expect around rental demand, occupational demand, what size floor plates people like, what parts of the cities are good, what parts of the cities are bad. Are we near transportation hubs? We do all of those. Building due diligence, technical due diligence. Is the roof going to stand? The wall is going to stand? All that has to be the starting principle. But in parallel, we're constantly thinking about, is this a canvas on which we can paint our vision? And so I think typically we would think that buildings in this kind of 20 to 30 year old range, 80s, 90s buildings, concrete frame, good structures, we can often add a floor or two on top, fundamentally sound, are going to be there for the next 50, 100 years. We like those kinds of buildings. They have to be renovated anyways. We're not taking something that's just been done 5 years ago and then ripping out all the kit. I think that's wasteful. And equally, we're not trying to do it necessarily inside something where we'd rip out the heart and soul of it because it's whatever, 100-year-old building. I think these are complicated. But I think these sort of 20 to 30-year-old buildings seem to work pretty well for us. We like them in relatively prominent locations. So we think that if we're going to do this, we should do it in a way that's highly visible, so it can be an exemplar for others. No point in doing it on a back street somewhere in a marginal suburb. Maybe the time will come to renovate those kinds of buildings, but we want this to be an example for others to follow. So we try to find relatively prominent buildings, with long views towards them, or corner locations and prominent locations. So we look at about 1,000, 1,100 acquisitions a year. We do 2 or 3 or 4. So we have a fairly shallow and wide funnel. I think it's difficult to mechanize screening within real estate, because information is very imperfect in real estate. And although we try to codify it somehow, it's very difficult to do that. So I think it ends up being that of the 1,000 that we look at, 750 are quick nose, but the other 250, so you've got to look at. And it might be you look at it for 5 minutes, but you might look at it for 5 hours before you can really get a clear view on it. When we acquire it, unlike a fund like a Blackstone or even larger, smaller funds like Tristan or Ryan or Patron, these are large, they raise a billion of capital at a time. We're doing everything ourselves. These larger funds are making asset allocation decisions. So they would find an operating partner to go and do student housing in Paris, and another operating partner to do office buildings in Manchester. And then those operating partners are the ones who are executing the strategy on the ground day by day. And real estate's odd that way, because you've got fund to fund, sometimes fund, JV partner, operating partner, asset manager, property manager, building, rent paying tenant. And what are you buying as an investor? You're buying the thing at the bottom, that rent-paying tenant. That's the cash flow stream that ultimately is winding its way back up to you. So then the closer you can get to that, the better. So we're buying single buildings, individual buildings, and we're, for the large part, managing them ourselves and executing the strategies ourselves. So we'll gather all of the experts around the table, mechanical and electrical experts, architects if we need them. These are the people that we bring around the table. And then we sit around the table with them, I think critically and differently than others, and we drill into them our values, and both environmental sustainability and social impact. And we do it in every meeting, at every time, at every turn. And so that ultimately they can tell our story and our values as well as we can. So that's key to us.
You mentioned before the integration of the E and the S of ESG, and that a lot of investors can consider these as separate activities and have distinct teams, but you have an integrated approach on it?
We do. We definitely do. And we try to drill that into every aspect of the building, from design to operation. And again, I'll give you another quick example, which is at Tower Bridge Court in London, TBC.London. What we're doing there is we're putting in, it's a 100,000 square foot building. We're putting in a 3,500 square foot, we're calling it an urban village hall, which is a multifunction space that tenants in the building could rent out for a fee and use for events. But we're also programming in there activities with social enterprises, community groups. So it might be a school who needs a space to run an art exhibition for their kids for a week. It might be a social enterprise that needs to have a fundraiser or a skills workshop around technology and computer coding. And I think putting that inside the building, and then again, trying to deeply integrate the occupants of the building into that activity. So if it's computer programming, every company has an IT department. So why can't their IT people come down and spend an hour to teach someone about how to build a computer network? And again, I think that integration of community, both within the building and without the building, is really essential. So that's what we mean in terms of the integrating the E and the S and creating opportunities like that for impact at multiple levels across multiple problems in the problem set.
Could you maybe give me one example of an investment you've made, and how did you get there, and describe what it was? I don't know if you want to use this one, but I've found Windmill Green in Manchester is maybe a kind of an ideal example, but I'd like to understand, how did you select it? What did you do? What's the result of it?
Yeah, I think Windmill Green's a good one because there's an end-to-end. We finished it. When we were going to buy it, it was an empty building for 7 years on a main big square in Manchester, probably 3 or 4 buildings away from what you would think of as being the center of Manchester, St. Peter's Square. But it had been empty, it had been long overlooked, and for 7 years. And there had been a variety of planning applications that had been brought forward to knock it down. It was, I think, 5 stories when we bought it, but a lot of people just wanted to knock it down, build a 40-story skyscraper, maximize net lettable area, build the biggest thing that they possibly could. When those all failed, and then when we bought it, it had actually one planning approval for a 17-story office building, and that was gold-plated, all singing, all dancing, knock down, rebuild 17 stories, which had been opposed by many, including Historic England at the time, but actually won planning approval. But it was unfinanceable because the business plan for that required an assumption that you would achieve rents that had never been achieved ever before in Manchester, that high. So it was unfinanceable. And so when we looked at it, it was basically a dead deal. And so we said, why are we knocking this building down? It's a perfectly good building. It's only built 35 years ago, perfectly usable. And maybe we can come up with a business plan that doesn't require us to have 30, 34, 35, 36 pounds a square foot rent, but maybe 27, 28 as a refurb. Less risk, faster. So that's what we did. So we bought it, had an architect design competition, came up with a plan that would take it from roughly 50,000 square feet to roughly 80,000 square feet, took off the facade, went up 2 floors, did a little bit of infill in places to improve the floor plates, and then implemented a wide variety of social impact and environmental sustainability-led pieces to it. We reduced the carbon footprint of the building, operational carbon footprint, by something like 85%. We put solar panels, a big, huge green wall, attractive staircases to help health and well-being, so people would actually use the stairs as opposed to take the lifts everywhere. We put in cycling infrastructure. During the construction, we hired literally homeless people who were sleeping rough around the corner, brought them in, gave them a job, did skills training workshops for veterans, ex-military service personnel who would come back and when were jobless. We went to juvenile groups that were helping to try to get kids back who had lost their way, try to get them into the construction sector, got them skilled up and gave them jobs and apprenticeships on the site. We brought in people who were just curious about the construction industry and gave them tours of the building and showed them what happens on a building site. So lots of things around jobs. We also did things on the social side around marketing and branding. So every brochure has got photographs and images and things in it. So rather than hire professional photographers and illustrators, we went to the local community colleges and gave them to the students there as projects. We did something around the hoarding that protects the building. When you're construction, you have to put these walls and fences up to prevent people from coming in. Normally, you would paint them or decorate them with some messages you want to deliver about the building. Again, we went to Shillington College where we found art and design students. We had them briefed by our marketing teams like a professional project and had them design posters that ultimately we used on the building. So we gave them real world experience that they could put in their CVs. They were proud there for 2 years. Their artwork was adorned on the outside of the building, hopefully help them get jobs. So we did lots of things on the social side. We did put art exhibitions in the reception area for local upcoming artists. So lots of stuff. Ultimately became a BREEAM Outstanding building. So in recognition for its environmental sustainability in particular, it's the first multi-let office in Manchester to get BREEAM Outstanding. And it won all sorts of social impact awards for delivering impact within the context of a commercial office building.
And how about the financial returns?
I'll give you a hard and fast number. So our business plan had 28 pounds a square foot in rent. The highest rent we've achieved in the building is 36. And now it's a refurbishment. It's exposed concrete ceilings, and it's a refurbishment, it has columns. So 36 pounds a foot. Highest rent now being achieved in Manchester is $37.50 for new construction. So it's within a hair's breadth of new build. So I think that the reason why is I think that people, as Simon Sinek says, people buy your why, and that building has a powerful, very self-evident why. That you walk into it and you see it, it's deeply integrated and authentic, I have to say. So it's from the materials, it's this makery type materiality to it, where there's a staircase of this folded sheet metal that you can imagine someone bending, handrails carved of wood, there's stone on the floor, there's this gigantic living 6,000 plant green wall, largest in Manchester. It has this authenticity around it and materiality around it that I think resonates with people when you combine it with the social agenda.
You can't talk about climate change without talking about concrete and steel. What role do you see them playing versus new materials such as maybe cross-laminated timber in the built environment?
Yeah, we've been thinking about concrete and steel for quite some time, as many others have. It's a staggering statistic. I always find this one interesting, that if concrete was a country, it would be the third worst emitter behind China and the US. If steel was a country, it'd be number 4. They're awful. I mean, and these are to debate sectors. These are challenges that are very difficult. Concrete's pervasive, steel is required to build buildings. But Scott, we've been building buildings the same way as we do today for the best part of 100 years. There's been almost no innovation in building construction since we built the first skyscrapers in New York. Around the margins, and some that you talk about technology, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but the basic fabric of a building is built the same way it has been for the best part of a century. Staggering. So we're doing things around concrete and spending time with people who are doing innovative things in concrete. So we're using cement-free concrete wherever we can. So cement substitutes in concrete. So it reduces the carbon footprint of concrete by something like 80 to 85%. This is where we're doing things on a building by building level. Hands-on is, I think, a competitive advantage of ours because we understand how concrete and steel are made. So the difference between steel made in a basic oxygen furnace and steel made in an electric arc furnace, 40 can have as much as 40% recycled content steel. The other can have as much as 85% recycled content steel. You've got to get into the details of where your stuff's coming from. You have to look all the way through the supply chain, all the way back. Glass is another one. Glass is an untapped area. You've got glass manufacturers like Saint-Gobain say that they use 36, 38% recycled content glass. Actually, if you ask them and you interrogate them, something like only 1 or 2% of the glass that goes into their glass panels and buildings is post-consumer. Most of it's from shop floor tailings and stuff that they break around the factory and recycle within their own infrastructure. It's almost next to nothing. So we have to push the supply chain, but to first do that, you have to understand where the stuff comes from that you're using, and then be bold enough to go and say, the way that we've been doing it for the last 100 years is not good enough anymore.
Yeah.
And I think you can't do that unless you're literally sitting at a table of a design team meeting and saying, you're the steel person, you're the contractor, where are you getting your steel from? Show me the certificate that tells me what the recycled content is.
Real estate investors are traditionally risk adverse, including tech risk adverse. What is your approach?
I think technology is critical, and some of it is in supply chains. I think there's a huge amount of innovation coming in buildings material technology. So we just talked a little bit about concrete, steel, and glass, but I think there's lots of innovative stuff, cross-laminate timber you mentioned. It's probably not the panacea that everyone thinks it is, but I think it's an interesting alternative. I think there's huge innovation in technology around materials, which oftentimes gets left behind in the discussion around technology. Everyone's super excited about apps and sensors and everything, but less excited about where concrete comes from. Then turning what people think around technology, I think it's huge. We're putting sensors in all of our buildings, monitor and report on air quality, that monitor and report on occupation and how you're utilizing your space. Again, now with COVID, we don't want them to be over-occupied. We're also thinking about the future, building forward. The future of real estate is around what does it mean to be coming to an office, and what does that look like, and what do the offices of the future look like? So we're doing lots of things in offices, creating different spaces, breakout rooms, conference rooms, meeting spaces, convening spaces. Does anyone use them? Does anyone know if anyone uses them? So how do we find out? So we do that. We find out by putting in sensors, and that's what we do. And so we put in sensors to say, okay, we've got a sitting area with a fireplace and a big sofa and big screen TVs. Does anyone use it? How often do they use it? When? How many people? So I can tell you that. I can log in right now and see. It's on holiday Monday, so I wouldn't see much, but I could see how many people are using each of these kind of creative spaces. So I think sensors, environmental sensors, and these kind of things are really interesting. We're doing stuff around apps, I think, to build your point around social impact. Like how do you, in my example of the urban village hall and community-based volunteering opportunities centered around the building, how does anyone know? We've got building apps that we push out to everyone who's a tenant of the building. So we might have 1,000 people on an app, community boards, message boards. Hey, come on downstairs tomorrow at 5. There's an opportunity to see the kids' art show from the school next door. Let's all cheer them on and say, great job, well done. So we do that through apps and through technology. I think people find this technology interesting, but it can't just be technology for technology's sake. I think at some point we also have to recognize that you can invest a lot in technology that no one uses.
Yeah.
So we don't want to do that, and it's expensive. So I think that's important to figure out what is the technology and to test out the technology that people actually want and will use.
We're investing for impact, or you're investing for sustainability, and somehow you got to measure your outputs. How do you verify your impact, and is it possible to move from outputs to verifiable outcomes?
Yeah, let's leave aside the environmental stuff for a second, because I think that's relatively easy to measure, although we should come back to it on the net zero question, because there is some struggles around defining net zero. But on social value, I think first of all, within real estate, I'd say, at least anyways, but I think this is probably a wider problem, that most investors don't have the language of social impact or the understanding of social impact. They think social impact is having a GoFundMe page to raise £10,000 for a charity that they've picked out of a hat. That's not social impact. Social impact, as you well know, it comes from the philanthropic sector and has been documented for 30 years, and it's around the things that you mentioned. It's around thinking about having an outcomes taxonomy and thinking about a theory of change and how you're having transformation. What's the difference between an activity and an outcome and a goal? I tell you, in real estate, when I start talking in language like that, people's eyes glaze over. Very few people have the toolkit to really even begin to talk about social value. Unfortunately, we've rushed to the conclusion. It's like putting in bike racks. It's like everyone says you got to put like bike racks, and somehow 30 bike racks is better than 25 bike racks. I find it interesting that people will do that without understanding the motivation and the why behind it. What outcome are they trying to achieve by putting in those bike racks? It's just a piece of metal. Otherwise, it's, you know what I mean? It's not authentic, and it's not achieving its stated goal if that's all you're doing. In real estate land, we've jumped to the conclusion of trying to measure social value, and there's a whole sort of mini industry now of firms that are purporting to measure social value. Like there's one I wouldn't say anything bad about because we use them. They're fine. It's called Social Value Portal. And they use something called the TOMS framework. I don't know if you've ever seen this as these indices of multiple depravity. So they'll go in and they'll look at the communities in which you're investing and they'll say that in this community, food poverty is worse than gender equality. You don't really have a gender equality issue. You've got a skills shortage. And they look at these kind of heat maps of 50, 60, 70 different areas of depravity and rank them. And they put these very scientific sounding percentages against them, against the national framework. So it's kind of a government.
What's the name of that? The TOMS framework?
TOMS, TOMS.
Okay. Is that UK?
Yeah, it's worthwhile looking at. And the company that is the kind of leader, it's called Social Value Portal. Mm-hmm. And so what they'll do for a company like us is they'll say, fantastic, we're so excited that you want to measure social value. Here's a proposal. We'll charge you money. We'll measure social value. And you're investing in this building. You bought it. You're going to invest 40 million pounds. This is a real case study from Tower Bridge Court. We're investing 40 million pounds CapEx. We've measured it now, and we think that scientifically you can create 140 million of social value. You say, fantastic. I'm going to put that in my planning application. I'm creating 140 million of social value. No one ever interrogates that, where that comes from. And what you find is how they're defining social value, at least again in real estate area, is we're trying to measure the value of the activity. So again, just to drill down a second. So what they do is they say, thank you very much, Scott, for agreeing to volunteer at our children's art exhibition next week. We see that you've volunteered 4 hours. Your time, this is honest to God truth, your time is valued at £15.46 an hour. So that's what it says in the TOMS framework. So we're going to take that, multiply it by 4, and so you've contributed whatever that is, 60 pounds of social value. They're not measuring the value of the outcome. They're measuring the value of the activity. Or if I give out my 3,500 square foot space for a night, that is a rental value of whatever, 250 pounds a night. I've created 250 pounds of social value. Doesn't matter whether I've taken someone given them the skills and skills training of the job to take them out of unemployment, or whether I've taught kids how to draw. That value is the same. It's not how we do things. We've not really gotten to the point, I think, where we can authentically measure social value, and we've jumped so far ahead into the conclusion. I worry that we're claiming victory when we haven't even fought the battle.
How do you measure your impacts? We've talked about some of the shortfalls and how other people are doing it, but how do you do it, like for your business?
So we use those tools. I have to say, it's like we use them, and it's because it's the only tools that are out there. We probably are transitioning away from using Social Value Portal to using some others that I think are tackling it in a broader and deeper way. But we also are not afraid of the anecdotal evidence. Like I know when we do something like with Soul Riders that I mentioned, I know that has impact. And I know that we've donated X amount of bikes and we've touched a Y number of lives. So I know that we're having an impact. I think it's difficult and a bit disingenuous to say like we've had 1 million pounds of impact from that. So I think we stop maybe at the anecdotal, or we allow at least the anecdotal to influence the analytical. So I think that's the way to go until we have a common definition of what good looks like, and ultimately I think a common currency of impact.
And now it's becoming very politically correct to pile on and say, oh yeah, we're doing our part. And so the risk is now it's, of course, a lot easier to slap a label or to say that you're impacting this many million lives and how many people actually drill down on it. In the real estate market, are there ratings and certification confusions in this regard? Because there's a lot out there. Is there a risk of this leading to greenwashing?
Yeah, I think in the social impact space, actually, there's no rating. So I don't know whether the building has a good social value, gold, bronze, or silver. So we thought about actually creating one ourselves. I'm not sure ultimately we'll do that. But yeah, there's really not much in the way of social value ratings. On the environmental sustainability side, there are tons. BREEAM, LEED, WELL for health and well-being, Wired score for digital connectivity, and tech, air rated for air quality. So I mean, there's a kind of a diffusion of rating, and you can end up being a kind of ratings chaser. My building's got 5 gold stars, yours has got 2. It's all around this question of what does good look like, and we're struggling, I think, to really answer that question. And so as a result, these things have jumped in to fill the void. Yeah, and I think there's definitely a pervasiveness of greenwashing. I think when things are not clear and ambiguous and measurable, it's up to you to tell me like what you think good looks like, and I might say what I think good looks like, and then who's to say you're right and I'm wrong, or vice versa, and one building's better than the other. It's like net zero carbon, just turning to that for a second. There's no definition of what net zero carbon is. It's the most complicated, convoluted measurement you ever come across. When we talk about carbon in buildings, we don't actually talk about carbon. We talk in terms of kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. What does a kilowatt hour per meter squared per year look like? Describe it physically to me. I have no idea. I can tell you what a ton of carbon looks like. It's a ton of CO2 is a ball of CO2 roughly 10 meters in diameter. I understand that. So why are we measuring buildings in kilowatt hours per meter squared per year? The average office building has 200 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. And a good building has 75. How do we visualize these things? I can't tell you. And how do you measure those things? And how do you validate and verify them? And what do you include and what do you not include? You've got landlord space, you've got tenant space. And some standards include some amount of energy use in tenant space, but not others. Some exclude tenant space altogether. It's a mess.
Is there a need for some kind of a single governing body to converge to some meaningful way to measure and to rate?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is. And I think I'm not a huge fan of government intervention because I think it usually causes more harm than good. But I think clear, sharp, and unambiguous regulation, I think, is useful. The UK has said no more petrol cars by a certain date. End of discussion, end of story. It's not some that are excluded, some that aren't. It's end, finished. We know that, and we're going to work towards that, and that's it. It's finished. So I think Australia is an interesting case study because, of course, they've had this system that they've adopted called neighbors, and they've, I think, now required that every building get a neighbors rating, and it looks at carbon intensity in a clearly defined, very specific way that is harmonized across all kinds of buildings, and you get a neighbor's rating between 0 and 6 stars, and that's it.
Yeah.
And I think that's coming to the UK, but I don't know whether it'll be adopted as policy or not, but it would be great if it did.
I think the UK's 25-year environment plan mandated biodiversity net gains. I think if I understand it right, you have to offset a certain amount of acres by improving the biodiversity for the number of acres that you're developing. Do you expect that real estate investors eventually will have to account for their biodiversity impact? I mean, what's your stand on this whole biodiversity net gains?
Yeah, look, I think it's hugely important. I think if we're trying to create authentic spaces where people want to work and live, I think being surrounded by nature is proven to be demonstrably better for business. And I think this is where we need to come at it from, is where in an office space, for example, it improves productivity, it reduces workplace absenteeism, increases health and well-being. And it's lots of studies that you could look up for your book that where biodiversity improves cognitive function, and genuine, like peer-reviewed science where this is proven to be like not just fractions of percentage differences, tens of percentage points improvement in all of these factors. Who doesn't want to have a workforce who's healthier? They achieve more. These are natural things that we all want. So I think it's interesting. I kind of have this notion of a rewilding of our urban centers, and cities like London, I think, are going to in great strides to make sure that we preserve the biodiversity we have, and by not allowing people just to build on green space and parks and things, and then to go back and this notion of rewilding. And it can happen at a building level, inside or outside, on roofs, on walls, like we've done. I think it's hugely important. Fortunately, again, this is where measurements and certifications push us down a blind alley, like BREEAM, for example, which, and I know BREEAM certification intimately. You get 1 point in the case of a couple of buildings we've done. We've gotten 1 point for having 4 species in our sedum roof, the green roof on top of the building. And if you get to 6 species, you get 2 points. Really, are we adding to the overall biodiversity of humanity by taking my 600 square meter sedum roof and having 6 species and not 4? I mean, this pushes us into weird decisions.
So, Basil, if you had to name the single most important challenge right now in the sustainable real asset space at this time, what would you say it is?
It's the absence of clear regulation and confusing financial incentives. For example, you get charged a lower rate of VAT on building a new building than you do on refurbishment.
Yeah, so the incentives are in the wrong place. What do you know now, about impact investing that you wish you knew when you founded FORE Partnership in 2012?
I think it's around this integration of the E and the S, that these aren't separate activities. And I think it took us a little bit of time. We've obviously come to that, but I think I wish we had known that a bit earlier. I think it would have short-circuited a lot of stuff.
Did you originally have them as separate functions?
I think in our mind they were separated, but we can use things like bike racks to have a social impact as well as an environmental impact.
Was there ever an investment that you invested in, and at the time you invested, you were convinced that it ticked all of the boxes, and to the extent that it was a sustainable investment. But in the end, it went pear-shaped or didn't turn out. And what was the lesson you learned from that?
Yeah, the retail deal we did where we thought we could, that retail was ripe for transformation, and but it was not very sustainable. And we thought we could turn it around to make it sustainable and socially impactful. Do things was in a high street. We could do things in the public realm and integrate with the high street, and it would be both environmentally sustainable and hugely socially impactful. And it didn't end up in being either of them, to be honest. We weren't really able to achieve much. And I think that what we learned there was that actually you need to have a willing tenant. And unfortunately, our tenant there was a big, huge multinational. I'm talking a huge game about their supply chain and ethical manufacturing and whatever, but they were the biggest bullies I've ever come across. And all they cared about was the bottom line. If we wanted to put solar panels on the roof or do things in an environmental or sustainable way, all they really cared about is being the refurbishment being delivered on time, on budget. And the property people were genuinely not nice people to be with. That I don't think that they carried the values of the firm. I learned is that you've got to have a cohort of people around you who are willing to come on this journey. And if not, actually, maybe that's the single greatest checklist item that you need to put on your pre-acquisition due diligence screening is who's in the pond with you on this.
Yeah.
And if it's not the right people, you need to fish elsewhere.
I just want to clarify, right at the beginning when you were introducing this, audio broke up a little bit. What kind of a project was it?
It was retail. It was a high street retail.
High street
retail. Big box retail. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, and then the converse of this, was there one, maybe you ended up doing it, but you were skeptical that it really ticked your boxes, or maybe you passed on it because you were convinced it didn't, and then in the end it turned out way better than you thought, and you were pleased you invested, or you regretted that you hadn't in the event that you hadn't invested in? Yeah. What did you learn from that?
Yeah, I think the Windmill Green one was a good example in the fact that we were able to get rents that were 30%, 35% above what our underwrite was. I think is a testament to how well that building, it was an ambitious and bold decision not to build what they had planning for. And if you said to any conventional investor, I know you're thinking of building a 200,000 square foot building, 17 stories tall, but actually we're going to just do 80,000 and call it a day. They would think that you're nuts.
But why were you skeptical when you went into it?
Because I think that's, even though we had a pretty well articulated ESG strategy, I think that's a bold decision and nerve-wracking, and it wasn't the right decision.
I know it turned out well, but what did you learn from that?
I think you've got to go all in. I think it's no small measure. Actually, I think this, I've said it, I think a few times, but it's this point around authenticity, it's so important, and being empathetic and having a building that kind of exudes those two values. I think if we had gone in by half measures, if we just put in the bike infrastructure and not the materials of the building, or we put in the social impact piece, but didn't put the environmental piece, I don't think it would have been. I mean, when you walk in, it's like meeting someone for the first time. It's like you make a decision, snap decision, thinking fast, thinking slow. You make a snap decision, and it's 1,000 different things that influence that are hard to unravel, but it's everything. It's when you walk in that building, how it makes you feel. And to codify that or create some sort of scientific formula is very difficult.
Someone wants to get into the sustainable real estate investment space, and I suspect that we're mostly talking about someone who's a lot younger than you and me. How would you advise them? What would be your advice about how to get in the business, or where they should cut their teeth if they want to ultimately do what you're doing?
I think it's wherever they have an interest or a skill. I think there's so many different ways. If they're technically minded and want to disrupt the supply chain, maybe it's around some of the materials of carbon space. They're more socially minded and they want to work for a company and implement some of the social programs that we talked about. I think there's so many different ways. I wouldn't be prescriptive. I would just say that they need to carry their passion and find, most importantly, companies that are open-minded enough and willing to be part of the transformation. That's the key in whatever topic is of interest to them. It's identifying those companies that are the thought leaders and who are really pushing the innovation, as opposed to just providing lip service.
Yeah. Excellent. Listen, Basil, I've learned a lot. It's very interesting what you're doing. Congratulations on what you've accomplished. And also thank you for your effort in doing that. And thanks for being part of the project and speaking with me today. So I really appreciate you taking the time. It was great talking to you. Huh?
Yeah, thanks. You as well.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please do me a favor and hit the like button and subscribe to receive future episodes. You can find more interviews, articles, and information on sustainable and responsible investing at our website, sri360.com. If you enjoyed this interview and you would like to read more lessons learned from world-class SRI investors, get yourself a copy of my book, Sustainable and Responsible Investing 360 Degrees. It's a must-read for anyone wanting to know more about investing for positive social, environmental, and ethical impact, all with market returns. These are the stories and tactics of those leading the way as sustainable and responsible investing goes mainstream. Sustainable and Responsible Investing 360 Degrees is now available in hardcover, ebook, and audiobook format wherever books are sold.